From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
This morning, we have truly a remarkable panel. This is really the panel. We don't have all of them, but this is the panel. Ellen Siegel from Friends of Cancer Research, Dr. Louis Weiner, thank you, from Georgetown University Lombardi Comprehensive Cancer Center, all members of the task force and the Blue Ribbon panel, and two other people coming, Dr. Singer and Dr. Lowy. Dr. Lowy is the acting director of the National Cancer Institute, the agency that was basically charged with getting this together, and Dr. Singer is the acting deputy director. And so you see, we really have a good set of people to enlighten us and make us understand how this is going to affect us and change our lives. I think we'll hear from Vice President Biden, who was appointed to lead this whole initiative by the president, as many of you may or may not recall, in his State of the Union address back in January. And I thought, who better to lead us off and give us an overview but Vice President Biden. So.
Hi, everybody. This is Joe Biden. I delivered a report to President Obama laying out how far we've come since he put me in charge of the Cancer Moonshot. That was back in January. And to lay out a real vision for where we need to go in the immediate future, to do in 5 years what otherwise would take 10, to inject a real sense of urgency into the fight against cancer, and to change the culture and reimagine our system in order to be able to win. You know, when President Nixon declared a war on cancer in 1971, he had no army, he had no resources, and no clear strategy. But after 45 years of progress, funding research, training scientists and physicians, and treating millions of patients, we now have an army. And we have tools, powerful tools. And with the Moonshot, we now have a clear strategy for the road ahead. It matters, folks, because there's a consensus now that we're at an inflection point with science, medicine, technology, all advancing faster than ever and offering real promise. But we can't play by the rules of 1971 when we didn't have this working for us. In 2016, there's much more we can do. Just 5 years ago, for example, immunotherapy, using the immune system to kill cancer cells while protecting healthy ones, wasn't taken seriously. Now it is, and it's working with other disciplines and offering real hope. Decades of research have accumulated large amounts of data, but that data is not shared. It's hard to understand, and it's often not accessible to researchers and the public. But now we're in a position to break down these silos and share it all, because we have an enormous capacity with computing capability to take millions of pieces of data and analyze it. We can do 1 billion calculations per second now. And the Moonshot's vision report reflects what my wife and I, Jill and I, have learned about meeting with thousands of cancer patients, their families, advocates, physicians, researchers, philanthropists, technology leaders, and heads of state from all over the world. What we need to do. We have to do everything from enhancing prevention efforts, expanding access to care, forging an international commitment to fight cancer. This week, I also released a report from the Cancer Moonshot Task Force, the team I'm leading to reimagine the federal government's fight against this dreaded disease.
Okay, so you heard it from the Veep himself.
It touches almost every corner of the government. For example,
He had more to say, but we thought that what we played would set the stage for our discussion. And to extend our warm hospitality and welcome, I have and had the Deputy Librarian of Congress, Mr. Robert Newland, is here to extend that welcome and some opening remarks.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the 14th Librarian of Congress Dr. Carla Hayden, to the Library of Congress. And I'm not making this up. One of her top priorities is to improve the visitor experience.
What was the prior?
Dr. Hayden has had her own experiences in the library, navigating everything from parking to exhibits, and this is something that she's talked a great deal about and is really doing something about. In fact, we have just hired, he'll be arriving in February, an expert in museum visitor services and how visitors, interact. And so I think we have a great focus group here for the future. So I sympathize with you, and we're going to try and improve it. It's very nice to be addressing a sober audience today. As deputy librarian, I have the privilege of opening many conferences not unlike this. And last week, I opened a symposium for the American Folklife Center, and they were celebrating Kentucky folklife with an emphasis on Kentucky bourbon. And during the program, they had a variety of Kentucky bourbons, everything from Wild Turkey to Maker's Mark. And everybody was sampling all the different bourbons. So by the time I got up, I could have read the phone book and they would have applauded. So it's nice to have this great attentive audience today. The Library of Congress has, as you probably know, an incredible collection of treasures. Right now, we number just about 162 million items, everything from books, manuscripts, films, recordings, you name it, we've got it. And I hope if this is your first visit to the library that you'll have a chance to explore it, either online. We have a new website up. It's really, I have to say, I love it. It's really great, much more accessible. So I hope you'll be visiting that, but also visiting one of our 3 buildings here, because it is an incredible institution. But while we talk about those treasures, really the greatest treasure we have here at the Library of Congress is the staff. The staff are just incredible, from everything from our curators, librarians, attorneys, experts, just an incredible group of staff. But one of the treasures that I especially treasure is Dr. Sandra Charles. And I can't tell you how grateful we all are at the Library of Congress for her leadership of health services, for being proactive to attract events like this to the Library of Congress. So, Dr. Charles, I just want to tell you how much I appreciate the wonderful work you do for all the staff of the Library of Congress. So I've been waiting for a moment to do that, so I'm glad I could do it. Last night, I downloaded the report because I wanted to read it, and I found it to be a really fascinating report, but also, for a layperson like myself, very accessible. And I was also impressed with the kinds of recommendations that were coming out of the report, things that are very practical, that are very specific. And, one can't help but think of one's own experience with cancer. Both of my parents died of cancer, my father of liver cancer and my mother of lung cancer. So strategic goal 4 was one that really jumped out at me, and that was strengthen prevention and diagnosis. And I thought, if my parents had been able to take advantage of some of the things that are recommended in this report, their cancers might have been caught earlier, or they might have had better care at the time. So I can't tell you how impressed I was with the report and the impact that it had on me. We're so very grateful that the key members of the Cancer Moonshot Task Force and Blue Ribbon Panel agreed to participate in this panel discussion today. And I'm happy to see some congressional colleagues here, and policy experts. I see some folks from embassies, so I'm really delighted that this is also being videotaped so that we can share it with others and take advantage of this great expertise that we have with the panel today. Vice President Biden's initiative is really a good example of new developments in science policy and the so-called convergence. The idea, as I understand it, is to break down walls between scientific specialties and create a dialogue among scientists in different disciplines. So this panel is certainly one of those efforts. I want to read a quote. Very appropriate. We just had this videotape of Vice President Biden. But one of his quotes that struck me particularly was, "We sought to better understand and break down the silos and stovepipes that prevent the sharing of information and impedes advances in cancer research and treatment while building a focused and coordinated effort at home and abroad." So again, thank you to the panelists, and I know everyone is going to enjoy this panel today, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. So you see, you got a good old-fashioned library welcome. You learned some buildings we didn't intend to show you today. And you will have to come back after March when our expert comes on board, then you'll see the new experience. So I have to say that when the news of the moonshot came out, it immediately got on my radar. And I wanted to make sure I could bring it to the library and to share it, because that strategy that Mr. Newland mentioned, having to do with prevention, is precisely what we are about in health services. And so what we have done over the past few years is to bring in as many partners as we can in order to get our programs going. One such partner, or actually we have a committee of such partners comprising library employees. But one such partner, who is the chair of that Wellness Advisory Committee, which is what we call it, is Juanita Lyle. And she is a bundle of energy. She tags people, as she calls it. And before you know it, you're just tagged, and you're just doing so many things. So when I expressed to Juanita what one of our dreams was, or vision, she said, "I think I got this." And sure enough, she looked at the panel, recognized the name from the panel, this wonderful Dr. Siegel to my right, left, center. And we got on a telephone conversation, and here we are. So I'd like to bring Juanita up just to give some perspective as a cancer advocate about the initiative. And Juanita will tell you, but I'll tell you too, because I'm so impressed by her. She's a 4-time cancer survivor and started when we didn't have much to offer at all for breast cancer in particular. So she really is a testament to so many things scientific and so many things just natural order. So Juanita, would you please come and give your perspective?
Hi, everybody. This, for me, is a beginning of a new day, beginning of a new time in the history of cancer. You see, I am the past history of cancer because I was back in the day when none of this was happening. In 1976, I was diagnosed with third-stage breast cancer. And I was only at that time, so now everybody will know my age, but now at that time I was only 32. And so I was in a time where it was an old woman's disease, not a young woman's disease. So today, this year, is actually my 40th year anniversary since my first diagnosis. I had my first reoccurrence in 1980. My second reoccurrence in 1981 that had gone from localized to regional. I diagnosed actually both of my reoccurrences, and I've had a total of 8 biopsies in which 4 were negative. So back then, when I had my diagnosis, I came into my doctor's office and I told him, okay, this is back again. And he looked at me and he said, oh, and it just so happened that it went back to the same place after the excessive surgery that I had at that time, because it had gone into the lymph nodes of my lymph nodes that I had were already infected with 7 lymph nodes filled with the cancer of the 19 that were removed, and the size of almost 5 centimeter large tumor that I had. So here I was the second time, and I came back to him and I said, this crap is back again. And he kind of looked at me and he says, no, it couldn't be. You've had 3 years of two different protocols of chemotherapy, and you had a year of tamoxifen, so how is this possible? And he sat there and he fell and he actually cried and fell apart on me. And I said, wait a minute, get this straight. I am the patient, you're the doctor. You need to get this straight. So here I was, after 3 years, here I am after 3 years of chemotherapy, 3 months of radiation, a year of tamoxifen, and that I had here back then, at that time, I had a 6-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old son. So they watched me fight cancer from 1976 to 1982. I didn't even get past the 5 years. I also consented to a clinical trial, of which I was the only African American to actually be in that clinical trial in 1977. So I've lived with many challenges in the aftermath of cancer, because back then there wasn't any monitoring of one of the things that Moonshot is going to be doing. There was not any monitoring of how cancer, your chemotherapy and your radiation was done, because it was all about, back then, about the disease that the person had, not the person who had the disease. So they did everything to try to get rid of the disease, but at the same time, it ended up with us doing time with other things down the road for the aftermath of cancer. I had to create my own patient navigator system because there wasn't any. There was not a patient navigator program. And what was really kind of ironic about that, a couple of years ago, this is quite a few years ago, when I had been chosen in 2001 to be one of NCI's CARA members, which is called Consumer Advocates for Research and related activities. I had a chance to work on the first African American patient navigator workbook. So that was kind of ironic, because I was coming in with experience from what had happened to me of figuring out how I could pull all my doctors together, how I could pull all of them together to say, okay, she's doing this, they're doing that. Here I was pulling together my own navigation system. So all of what has been happening with Cancer Moonshot are all the things that I had been preaching to so many people for so many years about looking at the patient and not looking at the disease as the whole ball game. So today, this is an incredible day with me. Unfortunately, in my life, my sister ended up getting cancer 3 times, but she got tired of the fight. She got tired of the unknown, the unexpected, and uncertainty that cancer creates in our lives. She ended up she actually had cancer in between the first time, in between my first and second cancer. And back then, it was shameful to have cancer because everybody thought that you had done something. I hadn't done anything. I was a person that ate right, that did the exercise, that did everything right, but yet I turned up to have cancer. My late grandmother died of ovarian cancer, but they thought that that was a cancer, that was a possible family history. Recently, I had a genetic testing of 32 of my genes, and they found that not one single of my genes were mutated. So therefore, they had to rule out family history. So how I got it, I don't know. But I haven't been trained as a scientist or as a doctor, but what I have been trained to do is to walk in the shoes of cancer. So today, I say thank you, Ellen, for taking the call, and I say thank you to Dr. Charles, who challenges me and encourages me with her knowledge of Dr. Extraordinaire, who shares my vision for all to stay well and have better health. Thank you.
Thank you, Juanita. And although your program says I'm going to give you my perspective again, I won't do that to you. I will call on our panelists, and it's fitting also that Juanita, as an advocate for patients, precedes our first speaker, who is Ellen Siegel, who is both founder and chairperson of Friends of Cancer Research. And so she's a member of the Blue Ribbon Panel, and in her role as a cancer advocate, she will explain to us and discuss the recently passed and signed bipartisan Cancer Cures Act, and also talk about some of the issues that have been raised regarding some of the recommendations vis-a-vis the FDA and others. So, Ellen, without further ado, your slides, excuse me, the slides will be up, and please come up.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here. And Juanita, what a story. What a story. What an inspiration you are. As we all know, it is about the patient, and it's about the journey that they go through and their family and how personal it is. So we care deeply about the science, but people get cancer, and there's none of us that are not affected. My journey started also on a personal loss with my sister. So this week is a really special week. This is a very special week. The 21st Century Cures Bill was passed. We were lucky, many of us were there at the White House to see President Obama sign the bill. My task today is to talk a little bit about other components of the bill, because you have experts that will talk specifically about the moonshot, but there's a lot more to it than the moonshot, although we are cancer advocates and we're cancer people in this room. But this happens also because of leadership. The moonshot really came out of a personal and devastating loss for Vice President Biden. You know, any loss is tragic, but the loss of seeing your child die is probably the worst thing that any parent or anyone can really sustain. So it was his leadership, his passion and energy that really got us to the moonshot. So I will go through a few of the other components, and then you will hear in detail about the Blue Ribbon Panel, and I was very honored to serve on it. One of the things that we all know is that research is crucial. We cannot help patients without research, and although we've invested a lot, there's a lot more to do. When we declared the war on cancer, we thought it was one disease. Now it's hundreds of diseases, and we've accomplished a great deal, but to really continue, we really need to invest in research, and the research funding has been really declining for many, many, many years, so this truly will help us get young scientists and get people into research, and this is really a very, very, very important component of it. And not only will it have $1.8 billion for the moonshot for the research, it will have money for precision medicine and for the Brain Initiative and opioid addiction, so there are many other things. But there's more to this than the research itself. Also, the regulatory agency, the FDA, before a patient gets a treatment, it has to be approved by the FDA. And one of the important elements of this bill is the Office of Cancer Oncology, the consolidation of the cancer at FDA. Before this, it was in 3 divisions. It was in CBER, which is really biologics, drugs, and CDRH. Now, all clinical decisions will be made by oncology experts. And that's really important, although it's really important to know about antibodies and vaccines and diagnostics. We want these decisions to really be made by people who really have treated this disease in the natural history, and there will be resources for this. The Office of Oncology will have $75 million over a period of years, and the FDA will have $500 million, and there will be many, many, many things. One of the things that are really important in this, which I'm sure Dina and Dr. Lowy will cover, is a high-risk, high-reward research, because that's really important. We don't always get it right, and we want a young workforce, and we want people to really be audacious about ideas. Young scientists are crucial. We can't have a pipeline, and we can't develop these answers overnight, and having people enter science and have ways for them to come into science and to be attracted and to keep them is really crucial. One of the other parts of this bill that I'm very proud of is patient-centered drug development. And what that really means is really getting patients' priorities. Everybody wants to live. Everybody, and they want treatments that will help them, but they also want quality of life. They want to know things that are important to them. Is it toxic? Will I feel a lot of pain? Will it handle my nausea? Will it handle things that are most important to me? So we tolerate a lot of toxicity in cancer because we have to, and we understand there's a lot of risk. But we want the ability to really understand the human experience and what it is like, because if you have 3 months or 6 months or a year, those months are really important to you, and the quality is important. So the idea of understanding patients' needs, patients' priorities is really important. I think I don't know how to advance my slides. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. I'm not going to go through some of the technical things, the precision biomarker qualification, but it really means that when you start to really, and this will be done by NCI and others, you really want to be able to understand specific genetic mutations and really targets. Because, we used to treat breast cancer, we used to treat prostate cancer. Now we know it's all genetic. We know that these targets are important and the disease is different. When we treated breast cancer, why would one survive and one didn't? Now those are scientific issues that are going to be important. Accelerating drug development is important. Also, the approval of drugs for limited populations, that really has to do more with antibiotic resistance. But we know that that's really important, keeping and recruiting the brightest and the best. And I want to go through a few other minor things before I turn it over to my colleagues who will give you the specific recommendations of the Blue Ribbon. Let's see what I have. Streamlined data review. Priority review for breakthrough devices is really important, because the idea is right now we have genetic testing, and we need to make sure that's accurate. We want to make sure that we understand how to really diagnose people. Everyone focuses on the drug and the treatment and not a lot on the diagnostic, but today these genetic panels and these assays that one uses is really important, and getting better ones that are more specific on the market is important. So just before I pass it over to my wonderful colleagues, I do want to say that when we were appointed, and Dr. Singer was in charge of this, and we all said, how is this going to happen? How are 26, 28 disparate people going to come and advance cancer and give recommendations in 5-6 months? And the goal of the Blue Ribbon was really to create improvements that would have normally taken 10 years in 5. And I think the first meeting we were all scratching our head. And I think for Dr. Singer, it was also very challenging, and Dr. Lowy, how are we going to do this? But everyone came together Everyone understood the importance of the mission and the opportunity, and I'm very proud of the report that was written, and I know it will profoundly impact patients. And really special thanks for putting it together. It was day, it was night, it was 24/7, but everyone understood the urgency. And also, this drug passed overwhelmingly in this bill in the House and the Senate. It was bipartisan, and in these days in Washington, where the environment is very toxic, to really see the enthusiasm for this was wonderful. So I'm very honored to be here. I'm inspired by you, Juanita, and your incredible story. And keep on fighting and keep on doing the right thing. And we're all trying very hard. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Siegel. The next two panelists who will come first, Dr. Singer will come for, and she will give a broad overview of the Moonshot Initiative and the panel recommendations. And then Dr. Lowy will highlight certain specific recommendations relating to the various kinds of research, starting with basic and then discussing implementation and how they relate to the cancer patients. We have the bios of our speakers in your program, and as I mentioned just before they came in, Dr. Singer she's the director of the Division of Cancer Biology at the National Cancer Institute, which is a part of National Institutes of Health. And since 1999, while simultaneously serving as senior investigator and chief of the Molecular Regulation section of Experimental Immunology Branch, position she's had since 1991. She currently is serving also as acting deputy director of the National Cancer Institute, and you can see more details in your program. Dr. Lowy is acting director of the National Cancer Institute and also chief of the Intramural Laboratory of Cellular Oncology in the Center for Cancer Research there at NCI. And his medical degree comes from NYU, NYU, and then his internal medicine residence is at Stanford University. He also did a dermatology residence at Yale University. And Stanford is one of those places near and dear to me, as I have two daughters who are alumna. So I really look forward to hearing from first Dr. Singer and then Dr. Lowy about the actual Moonshot Initiative. Please come.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here. Despite our somewhat late arrival, we did get a scenic tour of the library, a little bit rushed, but we're hoping to come back for a longer tour. I would like to also thank Dr. Charles for organizing this meeting, giving us the opportunity to tell you about the Moonshot. But before I start, I do want to particularly acknowledge Ellen Siegel, because without her tireless efforts, the Cures Act would have never happened, the Moonshot would have never happened, and we're all very indebted to you. So a round of applause for Ellen. So now that the Cures Act has passed, what I would like to do is give you a very brief overview of the scientific components of the Cancer Moonshot. As Ellen pointed out, the Cures Act encompasses more than just the cancer research, and in fact the Moonshot encompasses more than the science, but what I'm going to focus on is the science. So the Moonshot actually was launched, if you will, during President Obama's last State of the Union address when he announced a cancer moonshot effort, and followed that up with an official presidential memo that outlined what that moonshot was and what it was intended to accomplish. I've summarized the main points here on this slide, which is number one, to accelerate progress in cancer, including prevention and screening, and spanning the entire gamut of research from basic research all the way up through standard of care. Second main area was to encourage greater cooperation and collaboration across the entire cancer community and to enhance data sharing. So The effort really was instantiated through a federal task force, which is run out of the Vice President's office with the Vice President as chair of the task force. It consists of the heads of all of the agencies in the government that do anything associated with cancer, and including the heads of NCI, in this case, Dr. Lowy, and NIH, Dr. Collins. And within the presidential memo, the NCI and its advisory board, the National Cancer Advisory Board, were specifically tasked with organizing a blue ribbon panel that would advise the moonshot effort as to the scientific opportunities. If I could. So the specific charge in the presidential memo was that a blue ribbon panel be established to provide expert advice on the vision, proposed scientific goals, and implementation of the cancer moonshot. And it was also charged with providing an intensive examination of the opportunities and impediments in cancer research. What the memo didn't say, but Ellen alluded to, was that we had to do all that in 5 months. The panel itself had 28 members. The members really represented, again, the spectrum of the cancer community. It included clinicians, researchers, advocates, Ellen was among them, representatives from pharma, from the IT community, from the private sector. And the panel itself had 3 face-to-face meetings to identify the areas that we would focus on, to consider the recommendations, and then to finalize what would be in the report that would be sent to the task force and the Vice President. In order to accomplish that, 7 working groups were organized. Each of the working groups was co-chaired by 2 members of the Blue Ribbon panel, so we had good continuity between the panel itself and the working groups. And those areas of investigation were clinical trials, data sharing, cancer immunology, tumor evolution, implementation science, pediatric cancer, precision prevention, and early detection. So the entire span of cancer, with the goal of identifying those research opportunities in each of those areas that were poised to be accelerated. Because as Ellen pointed out, the goal here is to try to accomplish in 5 years what would normally take 10. So to really specifically find that segment of the entire cancer research portfolio that could be accelerated with the additional funds that would be coming for research through the Cures Act. The working groups met weekly. Each of the groups met every week to discuss, first to identify those areas within their topic, and then to really discuss which ones were the best poised to be accelerated, and then to finally generate 2 to 3 recommendations for consideration by the Blue Ribbon panel. In addition, because although 28 people and 7 working groups with a total of about 150 people involved sounds like a lot, it's really only a fraction of the whole cancer community. So we wanted to also have outreach activities to let anyone who had an idea submit it. And so we had a variety of ways in which people could submit ideas. The major one was a website where people could go and submit their ideas. We also had so-called listening sessions at some large conferences. And in the end, we had over 1,600 ideas that were submitted. Each one of them was actually read and considered. And in a gratifying way, all of the ideas that were received were ones that had been touched upon by one of the working groups. So we felt pretty confident that we had covered everything that could be covered. So in the end, we had a total of 13 recommendations. They were summarized in the report in 10 recommendations. There was some overlap in the recommendations. And those recommendations identify exceptional research opportunities that are poised to be accelerated and could powerfully advance our understanding of cancer. And you can read the report in its entirety at that website. I've also noted the website at the bottom of every slide if you want to jot it down and take a look at the report later. If I could have the next slide. There were a number of cross-cutting themes that were identified that coursed through all of the recommendations. Prominent among them was health disparities research. There was also a clear interest in developing a national network of patient biological and clinical data so that we could amass more data about each of the cancers to really learn more about it in depth. Prevention, development of biomarkers and new technologies was cited in many of the recommendations, as was data sharing and the need to develop computational models. And finally, and importantly, the need to collaborate across all the sectors was highlighted as essential for really advancing our understanding. In the next few slides, I'm going to very briefly touch on the 10 recommendations that are summarized in the report, just so you have a sense of the flavor of each of them. I'll note that the recommendations are listed in alphabetical order, if you will. We didn't want to assign numbers to them to give any implication of prioritization. The way the recommendations were developed, they're all high priority and of equal priority. So, A is the network for direct patient engagement. The idea is to allow any patient anywhere to be able to engage with the research community through a network, and that they could then pre-register for any clinical trials that might become available. Cancer immunotherapy, translational science network. I think we've all heard about the huge promise of cancer immunotherapy, but we have a lot to learn. And so this network is designed to give us insights into such things as why do many patients quickly develop resistance or not respond at all. Leading to the next topic, which is to identify the mechanisms of therapeutic resistance so that we can predict who is going to respond and who is going to be resistant. Creation of a national cancer data ecosystem, as I think you heard from Vice President Biden. Data sharing is of utmost importance, and the goal here is really to link everybody and all the data sets, and importantly, allow patient access to those data as well. So the patients will be an important component of that ecosystem. A huge emphasis on pediatric cancer, which is very different from adult cancer, so a focus on the specific kinds of tumors and abnormal proteins that are generated in pediatric cancer. And I think Ms. Lyles referred to this, a real interest in trying to understand the symptoms that develop as a result of therapy and how do we manage them, how do we support them. And finally, precision prevention and early detection. Obviously, if we can prevent cancer, we're much better off than having to treat it, and therefore we need to also be able to detect it very early on. The last three, we can learn from patients who've already been treated. We can try to really probe in depth the biospecimens that we've collected to begin to understand who responds to therapy and who doesn't. I alluded to that in terms of immunotherapy, but we can do it much more broadly for all types of therapy. Finally, creation of a tumor atlas to understand in depth the molecular and cellular and architectural components of a tumor from the earliest stages through to a frank tumor, through to resistance, to metastasis, so that at each stage we might be able to predict how it's going to proceed and how it will respond to therapy. And finally, again, importantly in almost everything we do, the development of new enabling technologies. So what are the next steps now that the Cures Act has passed? The reports, both from the Blue Ribbon Panel and the task force, the overarching body, were released in October, and I'll give you a very quick summary of the task force report in a minute. We're beginning to implement the recommendations. We're starting to launch those that are feasible to do this fiscal year, and then for succeeding fiscal years, we'll look to our advisory boards and outside advisors to really identify how to best proceed with the implementation. Of course, we're going to establish public-private partnerships to help us with this. What we've outlined exceeds what anybody could give us, and so we need to partner with other agencies and with the private sector. And philosophically, it's something we feel is important to do to engage as much of the community as we can. And I should point out, and I know Dr. Lowy will probably also want to point this out, that even though we're putting huge emphasis on this segment of our research portfolio, all the other research needs to continue to be supported. Young investigators need to be supported, and so we are going to be conscientious in paying attention to those components of cancer research that are not identified in the Blue Ribbon Report. Quickly, the task force identified a number of strategic goals in its report, catalyzing new scientific breakthroughs. Their focus was on the technology, expanding mobile devices, et cetera, data sharing, bringing new therapies to patients, in this case, really focusing much more on clinical trials and eligibility than was cited in the Blue Ribbon Panel report, strengthening prevention and diagnosis, and importantly, improving patient access and care. So I think between the task force report and the Blue Ribbon Panel report, we've really covered the entire spectrum of cancer research and treatment and patient engagement. And I'll end simply by thanking Ms. Lyles for giving us such a moving account of her journey through cancer, and everything we're doing through the Moonshot is really to benefit patients like Ms. Lyle, her sister, and everybody else who's been touched by cancer, and to try to prevent others from going through that. So thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Doug Lowy. I'm the acting director of the National Cancer Institute. And I first want to say that it really is extraordinary for us to be here in the Library of Congress, because I think of the Library of Congress as the place that is the storehouse of accumulated knowledge for not just the United States, but also for the world and its continued accumulation. And what I think that what we're talking about is where we have been and where we are and where we hope to go. It's extraordinary for those of us in cancer research to see how in many ways we are favored. And in terms of the President of the United States last year having a precision medicine initiative in oncology, this year the cancer moonshot, and really the overall goals are paradoxically simultaneously, so that there will be more Juanita Lyles, because people who get cancer, more of them will do better. But on the other hand, there will be fewer Juanita Lyles because there will be fewer people getting cancer. And that really is what this is about. I have, I think, a total of 8 slides. The first 4 are really kind of trying to set for you some understanding and rationale of why cancer, why now. And the first slide shows what has happened to mortality rates since the mid-90s for cancer. And this is cancer in general. Men are in blue on top because they have the highest mortality rates. Women are in black on the bottom, and both genders together are in red. And what I would like you to see is, number 1, mortality rate in general going down. And if you compare the rate of decrease of the most recent 10-year period for which we have data, it is going down faster than the rate of decrease for the next earlier 10 years. Next slide, please. What What this slide depicts for you is that it is most cancers. It's not just people are smoking less, and so we have less lung cancer, and that accounts for the major change in mortality rates. It is important. But what's shown here is in the blue, the decreased percentage of mortality over the last 10 years for which we have data. And you can see on the left is men, on the right is women. And in red are those cancers whose mortality rates are going up. And so we need to pay a special attention to those that are going up. But before I talk briefly about one of them, note that this is attributable to decreases in the majority of the most common cancers, and that this decrease we think will continue, and we want it, if anything, to accelerate as a result of the cancer moonshot. So let me call your attention to the one that is increasing for liver cancer, both for men and for women. A large problem of this is an increase in the incidence and prevalence of hepatitis C virus infection, which is actually related to opioid epidemic and other kinds of drug use. As Dr. Siegel pointed out, the opioid epidemic is front and center with the 21st century cures. But mortality rates from hepatitis C virus infection in the United States are now almost twice as high as mortality rates from HIV infection. And the prediction is that over the next 15 years, that the mortality rates will more than double and come close to triple from this infection in the United States. And so one of the things that we're going to try to do is to intervene to reduce mortality rates before people develop liver cancer, before they develop cirrhosis, before they develop liver failure. Next slide. You may have seen this front page article last week from Lenny Bernstein, who's talking about life expectancy declining for the first time since 1993. And these are from the most recent data from 2015. The data that I have shown you are the detailed analysis that we have done through 2014. And 8 of the most common of the 10 most common causes, the mortality rates went up. The 9th was essentially stable, but the 10th, what I've highlighted in blue, is that the report's lone bright spot was a drop in death rate from cancer. So the death rates from cancer have continued even with the most recent data, and despite other common causes of death having increased. Next slide. So I think I see this as kind of a lead-in. Why now for the cancer moonshot? The need has been present for decades, but it's now matched by the opportunity to be able to benefit from a major infusion of additional resources. And you've heard from Ellen and also from Dina about these opportunities. In some, obviously, too many people die from cancer. About 1.5 million get cancer. About 600,000 die from cancer each year. But as you can see from the decreasing mortality rates, we are doing better. And it's at a time when you're doing better, and it's not just for one disease, it's not just prevention, not just screening, not just treatment, but it's a combination of those. That's the time when an increase in investment is most likely to yield results that are beneficial for patients' prevention, screening, and treatment. Another reason is that immunotherapy has come of age. And I think that we've all been really impressed to see people such as President Carter, who had metastatic melanoma to his brain and was able to go about his business and get an immune checkpoint inhibitor, and he is now cancer-free and building houses for Habitat for Humanity, just like any 91-year-old person would be doing. So the next slide basically depicts for you diagrammatically how we view the moonshot itself, where in purple there's a lot of research. We've come to this point as a result of research that has been conducted. But the Blue Ribbon Panel really looked at issues, what's poised for acceleration, and that's shown in the blue part. Next slide. And Dina has already gone over some of them, but I just want to highlight two of them for you. The so-called Tumor Cell Atlas. We had a signature program over the last 10 years called the Cancer Genome Atlas that was funded both by the NCI as well as by the Genome Research Institute. And there are three important ways where technological developments over the last decade means that we can learn even more about the details of how cancer comes about than we could from TCGA. And we think that this understanding will help us in prevention, screening, and treatment. So we're going to try to look at the three-dimensional organization of what's called the microenvironment. That is not just the tumor, but also the cells that surround the tumor, the cells of the immune system, for example. The technology also now enables us to do detailed analysis of very small lesions. That was not possible 10 years ago. So we can look at premalignant lesions in ways that have never been examined before. And by looking sequentially over time, we can look at the progression and evolution of a tumor from its earliest point to most advanced. Dina mentioned pediatric cancer, and I'm just going to mention one aspect, which is fusion oncoproteins. And those are proteins that are rearranged that don't occur normally, but occur in a fairly large number of children with cancer, but they're different rearranged proteins for different kinds of cancers. This is a difficult thing to do, and there is not much financial incentive for the pharmaceutical industry or for biotech to do it. But we already have announced an effort to ask our investigators to make proposals for how to make make inhibitors against such fusion oncoproteins, because we think that in many instances they actually are important drivers of the cancers in children. Immunotherapy is really front and center among the recommendations, but Dr. Weiner is this is his area of research, and he's going to talk a bit about what's happening and what the opportunities are in immunotherapy. And I would point out that in addition to our being extraordinarily fortunate to have Ellen on the Blue Ribbon Panel, because having patient advocates on the panel made sure that the recommendations were going to be patient-centric. But in addition, we had people from the pharmaceutical industry, people from academia who do immunotherapy and make recommendations for us so that we're not competing with the pharmaceutical industry. We're not competing with private philanthropy trying to develop immunotherapy, but instead are doing supporting activities that complement what they do or are distinct from what they do. Next slide. And the last part is really especially for Dr. Charles, because prevention really is front and center. And as Dina mentioned, cancer health disparities, which we view as racial, socioeconomic, and demographic, and many of the proposals in the implementation part are designed to decrease the incidence of of cancer, or to have people who get cancer have a better outcome. And because of time, I'm just going to focus on colorectal cancer screening. Why colorectal cancer screening? Two reasons: need and opportunity. The need is that this is one of the most common causes of death from cancer in the United States. About 50,000 people die of colorectal cancer. What's the opportunity? We've improved treatment to a great degree, but we also know that colorectal cancer screening actually can decrease the incidence of this cancer and decrease mortality. The problem is that it is an underutilized effort for screening. There's a lot more publicity, for example, for breast cancer screening, but the opportunities to save lives in the short term from increased uptake of high-quality colorectal cancer screening are simply extraordinary. So I will stop there, and I really appreciate the opportunity of talking with you.
Thank you, Drs. Singer and Lowy. I think by now everyone is getting a really clear picture of why we are having this panel and how much promise there is in the future, both for us and for the community at large. And I think this is just wonderful. Are we loading? You done? Dr. Wiener's slides. We have loaded Dr. Wiener's slides. And I'm sure you was happy to hear Dr. Lowy say immunotherapy has come of age, because that is his area of expertise and his focus there at Georgetown. And again, Dr. Wiener has been an integral part of this panel and effort. He is the director of Georgetown's Lombardi Comprehensive Cancer Center and holds many distinctions: the Francis and Charlotte Gregnani Chair, a professor of oncology at Georgetown University Medical Center, and responsible for the operation and development of the Cancer Center, including the research, clinical, and educational missions. And I think over my time here, starting medical school in the 70s until now, I have watched the center grow and expand and come of age in itself, and become a very integral part of the cancer community. So it's a pleasure to welcome Dr. Wiener, and would you please come?
While Dr. Wiener is coming to the podium, I want to point out that he is the chair of our Board of Scientific Counselors in the Intramural Research Program, and we benefit enormously from his advice and counsel.
Thank you for that. I'm here with some of my heroes and with another one of my heroes, because we do all this for you. And I think it's really important to always make sure that we keep the patient at the center of everything we do. So as a director of a comprehensive cancer center, and there are 47 cancer centers like ours scattered around the United States, we have a great opportunity to work together. And I think it's important to note that while the Moonshot has created a roadmap, an infrastructure that helps us, I think, to really sharpen our focus on areas of great opportunity, it's also true that it's not like we haven't been communicating all along. I mean, we do an awful lot of work together. Where, you know, the enemy is cancer. It's not the other cancer center, right? And so what we try and do, and I think do very well, is communicate, interact with each other at the cancer center level around the United States. And in fact, as Dr. Lowy just mentioned, working the Board of Scientific Counselors of the National Cancer Institute is a group of external scientists and physicians who come and advise Dr. Lowy on the quality of research being done on the NCI campus, NIH, and up at the campus in Frederick. And so we have a great opportunity, I think, for collaboration and to really make sure we're keeping our game sharp, and we keep it sharp in the interest of our patients. So I had the pleasure of being a member of the immunotherapy task force, and I've been interested in cancer immunotherapy for a long time. Stated simply, immunotherapy is treating the patient's immune system so that their immune system can treat the cancer. It's a very different thing than treating with a drug that's designed to kill the cancer, or giving a radiation particle, or even a surgical procedure. This is basically giving people the tools they need to get rid of their own cancer. And it's really a radical concept, and it's something that I think we're still learning how to grapple with and how to understand in order to make it work better. Now, when I got started in thinking about immunotherapy some 30 years ago, I got to tell you, people who were looking out for me thought I was crazy, because they actually thought that this just didn't make any sense. The immune system had no relevance in cancer, but they were wrong. And so this is a slide, this is the only real data slide I'm going to show you, so don't get too concerned, which is related to a disease that Dr. Lowy was talking about, colon cancer, because even though this is a disease that can almost completely be prevented by regular screening, and having said that nobody need necessarily die from it just about, the fact is that it's still one of the most common causes of cancer and cancer death in the United States, because people don't get their screening done. So even a relatively early stage, like stage 2 colon cancer, can be cured quite commonly, but only 80% of the time. 20% of the people are doomed to relapse. And using the conventional staging that we had developed over the years, we knew that if you had a so-called stage 2 cancer and you gave somebody chemotherapy after they recovered from surgery, they had about an 80% chance of being cured, and it would go up to 83% if you gave the chemotherapy. So what that meant is you would have to treat 100 people with toxic chemotherapy in order to potentially save 3 people. 80 of them, it made no difference. They were going to be cured anyway, so you wasted their time. And for 17 of them, it didn't matter because it wasn't going to work. So the question is, how do we actually do a better job? And the first way you can do a better job is by figuring out who the 17 were going to be, or who the 20 were going to be. And it turns out by analyzing the way the body's immune system was reacting against the cancer, you got a better idea of what was going to happen. And moreover, it became clear that the immune system was controlling cancer outcomes. Next slide. So, you heard about the war against cancer. This is President Nixon declaring the war on cancer in 1971 in signing the National Cancer Act. Next. But we have been at war against cancer throughout human history. This is a photograph of an exhumation of a grave of a medieval Saxon man, and you can see he has a large tumor on his left leg. Okay, so we've been fighting this throughout human history. And in fact, next slide, the war on cancer is actually not between oncologists and cancer. It's not between pharmaceutical companies and the FDA. The war on cancer is fought one person at a time, and the primary combatants are the malignant cell population and the host immune system. Every single cancer that develops in a person's body that is so-called successful has figured out a way to either defeat or deflect the body's immune system that was directed against it. And this is a concept that I believe was a long time in coming. So, how does that happen? Firstly, a cancer can overwhelm the immune system by just racing faster than it. That doesn't happen very often. Sometimes it can hide. It can actually stay away from immune recognition, and then you have a big problem. But there are now treatments that are being developed that can actually overcome that by artificially, by figuring out what might be attacked artificially, using something called CAR T cells. You can subvert, cancer can subvert the body's response by elaborating chemicals that might block signals, and you can actually attack that with drugs and antibodies. And the cancers can shield themselves to exclude the T cells of the body's immune system from attacking the cancer. And finally, when all else has failed, a cancer can deactivate tumor-targeting T cells that attack tumor cells. And this is using a strategy called checkpoint inhibition. Next. How does this happen? Well, if you think about it, it's a fantastic system. What happens is that as a T cell that's loaded and ready to kill the cancer cell that it recognizes as being foreign gets into the neighborhood of the cancer basically erects checkpoints that will protect it. And on the next slide, you can see that it maybe isn't a cannon at the gate of the castle. Maybe it's a checkpoint, but perhaps it's really this. It's really Snow White eating the poison apple. And the poison apple is basically the tumor that is putting the T cell of the body's immune system to sleep. okay? And you can reverse that process with antibodies that are proteins made by that you can craft in the laboratory, that are ordinarily in our bodies, of course, that can actually block the ability of the killer cells of the immune system to be put to sleep by the tumor cells. And so this is a really complicated slide, and there's only one thing that matters here. As a T cell of the body's immune system is coming in to attack a cancer, what happens is that the tumor cell will elaborate various molecules that protect it, and they will put it to sleep. And one of the most powerful tools of this is a molecule called PDL1, which is a great defense mechanism. And antibodies against PDL1 or against the T cell marker called PD1 have been able to essentially have remarkable anti-tumor activities. Next slide. This is one example. This is in a disease called malignant melanoma, where individuals who were at near end stage of their cancer with survival expectancies of 6 or 7 months, and had been through many other treatments that had no longer worked for them or had never worked at all, they were treated with a combination of checkpoint antibodies. And it was expected that they would live 7 months. Their average survival is quite a bit longer than 40 months now. Many of these people are being what looks like maybe even cured by this treatment. And as you can see in these two plots here, on the top, this is looking at each line represents an individual patient. And you can see the vast majority of people who were treated in this clinical trial, the volume of the tumor, which is on the y-axis of this particular chart, drops. And it's sustained, and it doesn't grow back. And if you look at the magnitude of the response that you see on the bottom plot, you can see that the vast majority of these people have fantastic anti-tumor responses. This is a change. This is something we had never seen before. This is the pictorial depiction, if you will, of the revolution that we're experiencing in cancer care. Next slide. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. At last count, we have a game at Georgetown where we try and count how many different tumors are now potentially responsive to checkpoint antibodies, and we're up to 23 different cancers now. Now here's the news, and that's great news, but I want you to understand, and I think Dr. Singer mentioned it before, the great news is that these are treatments that can work in a lot of different cancers, but it's the rare type of cancer where these treatments work all the time in every patient. It's a significant minority of patients. Sometimes as many as 30 will respond to a single of these checkpoint antibodies. In one case, Hodgkin's disease, maybe as many as 80% will respond with a favorable outcome. But on balance, it's usually about 20%. And figuring out who those 20% are so we can treat them, and understanding what's happening with the other 80%, why do their cancers relapse? Why don't they respond in the first place? What other mechanisms are they using is one of the great challenges. And that's where the moonshot comes in. Because the immunotherapy focus of the moonshot is to create a clinical infrastructure, if you will, that will allow us to do the kinds of high-quality clinical trials so we can deeply interrogate these issues in collaboration so that we can identify who should be treated, when they should be treated, and how their cancers are responding or not responding to the treatments that we're using. And the other point that I think Dr. Lowy mentioned was the idea of using this sort of tumor cell atlas to not only think about what's going on in the cancer cells that are in a cancer mass, but what's happening with the immune component of the tumor so we can understand how that works. So these are absolutely foundational and really, really important new strategies that are being employed that are going to be facilitated by the moonshot and really will allow us to accelerate our progress in a very meaningful way. Next slide. So I'm not going to read that, but except to say that I do think that cancer immunology is a next great frontier. I think anybody who spends as much time as I do at NCI is awed by the remarkable depth and diversity of extraordinary research being done. And there are lots and lots of wonderful initiatives going on. But there can be no doubt that immunology is one of them. And I think it's really critically important to know that the moonshot is going to make these things happen and happen more quickly because people's lives depend on it. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Dr. Weiner, and other panelists. And while you frame your questions, which I'm sure there are several, and here's one lady, I'll let her ask her question before I give mine. Go ahead, please. One moment, we'll bring you a microphone so everyone can hear, and we'll capture it on the recording. Yeah, get your voice together.
Thank you, and thank you for all your work, and this is always so exciting. I would like to say, well, my name is Iris Portney, and I am so in awe of our first speaker about her journey. I will tell you that even though much of my life was related on science and technology-based policy, I happen to be an 18-year survivor of inflammatory breast cancer. So, in terms of, yes, nodding, go up there. So, as part of that experience, I went through stem cell transplants, any variety of sequential treatments, and at the beginning, my focus was, as with your report and recommendations, your first focus is prevention. Wish it hadn't happened. Second focus is treatment and outcomes. Hoping you find the stuff that works. Obviously, we found various things. But the third focus, and I know as the saying goes, high quality problem, the third focus is survivorship. Potential toxicity of treatments so that you can anticipate, recognize them right away, factor that into informed consent and choices about what to combine and when. And so the patient doesn't feel kind of crazy, bouncing from doctor to doctor with a symptom, et cetera, et cetera. So in that context, I have lots of large print notes to myself, don't get scared, but I discovered 5 years after I had had F5U, God bless it, responded well, but only 5 years later was a clinical trial research study released that said that it actually produced a certain amount of brain damage after effect. Wish I'd known that. We've recovered now, but still need more talking points. So I just want to suggest this as a missing focus. I'm sure it's someplace in the long report. I haven't read the entire thing, but it certainly wasn't a working group focus, and it wasn't in the executive summary. And that is a research focus on creating an extensive database, clinical-based data on survivorship complications. I'm very struck by, for instance, the establishment and work being done by ASCO on their CancerLink database, because as you all know, 3% of patients give data on clinical trials. But what I was up against in our real-time stuff was reporting to wonderful doctors who were also professors and researchers, things that seemed unrelated, and in the end, they would say, all I can say is we didn't think it was connected because we'd never seen it. And I said, great. This is all state-of-the-art. Who are you reporting this to? And the answer would be, no place to report it. So I said, how do we know with these new treatments, because we were using them as soon as they came out, that there aren't other patients that are getting them in other part of the country, talking to their doctors, reporting it, so that data can be looked at and assessed in some sort of patterns. So I would hope you'd get like a 10 to 20 year database that could be collected for stuff so that researchers and doctors and patients can begin to identify patterns that they weren't even looking for as the need comes up.
Thank you. I think that's a very succinct way of saying this. And maybe we have one of our panelists who'd like to address that.
Well, why don't you start and I can annotate?
Yeah. So one of the recommendations is patient-reported outcomes, and and survivorship, if you will. That's a part and parcel of it. And so it actually is specifically called out in the recommendations. In addition, we have for many years supported children's cohort survivorship study where we look at least two different issues. One is the outcomes And the other is, and for example, they're at increased risk of second cancers, aside from other long and short-term side effects, but also looking over time to try to make sure that the incidence of serious side effects is actually going down. We are in discussion of developing an adult cohort that would be looking specifically at that issue.
And this young lady back here,
Go ahead. You go, and then I'll go.
and Dr. Weiner
Yeah.
wanted to address it also.
So you raise an incredibly important point, and I think it's a point that we are coming to perhaps a little later than we would have liked to in the field, partly because we haven't had the luxury of having as many people being cured as we're beginning to have, nor have we had the great benefit of with almost as great benefit of people who are maybe not cured but having their diseases controlled for very long periods of time, so that we have to think about things. And it's very interesting because I think health systems around the country are beginning to understand this as being an important need for the patient population, and we're beginning to test out different strategies. Should this be oncology-based? Should it be internal medicine or family practice-based? There's a lot of questions that need to be addressed. The other thing that's happening, though, is that as the kinds of treatments we give our patients change, we are finding different patterns of long-term side effects. Anybody who experienced chemotherapy back in the old days, was what the side effects were going to be, you knew what the long-term consequences would be, and we as doctors were very good at treating very specific side effects associated with high-dose chemotherapy, for example. Now with these immunotherapy strategies, for example, we have to become doctors in a different way all over again, because now we have people whose body's immune systems have been activated and are causing all kinds of new and different kinds of long-term consequences that we have to understand. We all recognize that these consequences are in some ways good, paradoxically good. It's because they're working and people are living longer, and more people are potentially being cured, and that's a wonderful thing. But we're finding out that some of these treatments can attack the heart in ways we never even dreamt before. And we all have to become sensitized and sharpen our reading so that we can understand what has to be done. And sharing that information so that we can all learn about it is absolutely essential.
Dr. Siegel?
I just want to take this on also. It's an incredibly important point. 30 years ago, we knew there was toxicity, but we were really fighting for life, and honestly just tolerated a lot, and we didn't have a lot of long-term survivorship. We actually have a lot of data now, but there is a huge problem with it. First of all, it exists in much different bases. They don't talk to one another. They're not linked. So the FDA has the Sentinel Project, which is safety data, which is really claims data, but they have almost 200 million lives on it, so they have a lot of information. Up at Corey, I'm on the board of the Patient-Centered Research Outcomes, and we have probably 70 to 100 million lives in it. And we have the Cancer Link, and then we have the insurance companies have a lot of data. The problem is they're not synchronized. They don't talk to one another. They're different formats, electronic health records and claims data. So linking them to understand is important. But there is a new emphasis. Also, the NCI has the ProCTs. So this is really the idea of quality of life data, really defining metrics that are uniform so we can really understand it. Before that, companies or people would say, well, you feel better, there's less hospitalization, but the data wasn't rigorous. We didn't understand the standards. And NCI took the lead on it, this ProCTs, and now this really means that when companies are really doing their trials, or when we are doing our trials, even at the National Cancer Institute, we can incorporate these bona fide data sets and really understand, And what we're trying to do at Friends is work with the FDA to have these as label indications. So if you really have a treatment or choices between multiple treatments and you have a label indication that one is less toxic or has different side effects and they're both as equally efficacious, you can make more informed decisions. So this is becoming very important, but it's highly complex because there are different forms of cancer, different types of treatments. We didn't know them. But putting this data together and getting out of our silos and harmonizing it is going to become incredibly important.
Thank you. Back here.
Hi, thank you. I'm Maureen Harrington. I'm Assistant General Counsel here. And first of all, thanks to Dr. Charles for putting together this terrific panel, and thanks to you all for being here and for the very important work that you're doing. I'm wondering if you're going to be examining at all the role of diet in cancer prevention and treatment. I know the World Health Organization recently found that meat and processed meats in particular were a contributing factor. And I haven't gone through all of your report yet, but what I did see, I didn't really see that addressed. Is that something you'll be exploring?
The short answer is we are supporting research in this area. I want to emphasize something that Dr. Singer said. This is a subset of the research activities of the NCI. Given the status of diet and nutrition and our understanding of it, it's an area where there's enormous need. Whether there is the same opportunity right now, I think is not entirely resolved. So this is an area where we need to continue to support research. But it's not directly part of the Blue Ribbon Panel recommendations.
Dr. Singer?
Yeah, just to build on what Dr. Lowy said, in the working groups, a variety of things were discussed as potential for acceleration. In the early detection and prevention working group, and actually in the implementation science working group, both, the conversations included the question of diet and behavior and could anything be done there. And as Doug mentioned, the sense was we have a lot of research really going on, especially in the Division of Cancer Prevention, but nothing that could be clearly specified as poised for acceleration. And so the conclusion was to allow NCI to continue to support our ongoing portfolio, continue to pay attention to it, but not highlight it as one of the recommendations.
So you might be down the road then, or just, I'm sorry.
It's ongoing research that we'll continue to support.
I just want to add to that. First of all, we know a lot now, and there's a lot. I mean, first of all, not only at the National Cancer Institute, which has a budget of over $5 billion, but there are other institutes studying this in American Cancer Society. But, you know, we know a lot about tobacco. We know a lot about obesity. We know a lot about things that are screening. And unfortunately, there are behavioral, you know, we still struggle with behavioral changes. I mean, that's really, obesity is becoming a huge issue. So there's a lot that we have to study, and we have to understand not only the science, but the behavior. I'm still astounded about how many people walk around, and not just in Europe, which is decreasing a bit, but even here, our rates have gone down a lot. Screening, there's a lot going on in lung cancer, so it is a very important component, but there's tremendous amount that we know now that's not being done.
Oops, somebody in the back here first, and then here and here.
Yes, how you doing? I'm a cancer survivor, prostate. I have, the only problem I have a side effect from too much radiation. At times, I get the blood clots be coming, and pain is terrible. I have to flush my system a lot by drinking water. Okay, are y'all working on, you know, when you get too much radiation?
Yeah, those are very significant problems, and this is another survivorship question, isn't it? It's really all about that, and you know, it's obviously hard to comment on any individual case, but what I can say is that your story reminds us how important it is to remember that when we cure somebody, We have to make sure we cure them in such a way that they can live well in addition to living long. And this is where innovation and technology and can really play a role. So at Lombardi, we are finishing the installation of a proton therapy radiation unit. And there's some evidence, and certainly there's been good evidence over the years that as radiation therapy machines have improved in their technological sophistication, you can give a tighter and tighter degree of radiation right around the tumor, and you can spare the normal tissue so you don't have some of those terrible side effects that you just described. So I actually think that in part, the way we're going to be addressing a lot of these long-term side effects is by developing better targeted treatments, be it medicines or radiation or surgery. And I think the other thing we have to do, though, is we have to remember, and this is where survivorship research can make a difference, it's care research as well. How do we best find ways to help people who suffer from these kinds of side effects? And so I think, again, we're still in the early-ish phases of this to some degree, and it's a shame that we haven't made more progress in many ways, but I think that over the next few years, we're going to see an increasing focus on helping people clean up the mess that the doctors made after we got rid of their cancer.
Here, Stephanie. Here comes the mic.
I don't need a mic. Hi, I'm Stephanie Marcus from here at the library, and I'm a science librarian. And as we were talking, I was thinking back on my own family's experience back in 1977 when my dad was diagnosed with prostate cancer, which was missed by the local physician in a town of 2,500. And luckily, not in the end, but I was here at the library and had resources. I could do research, even though in those days we didn't have much for databases, but I could find articles. And I found that there were the NCI cancer centers, and I wrote to someone in Roswell in Buffalo, and they directed us to Iowa City where my dad got some treatment. In the end, he died, but I'm thinking now of all the people who go to their local doctors who don't really know that much, and how can we be assured that they're going to find us the care that we need? They're not going to miss things, and they're going to have the resources, because it still happens. You hear about people who do their own research, patients, parents who go out, and movies are made about it, but is there going to be something done about making sure everyone can get the care they need?
I could start to take that on. It's very complicated. One of the things that came out of the National Cancer Act is this extraordinary resource of these cancer centers all through the country. So there are, how many comprehensive?
It's 47 comprehensive,
47,
and there's about 68, I think it is, 69? Oh.
69. So the thing about it is, these are highly trained academics doing research and clinical care. 85% of our patients get treated in a community setting, and in some cases, and in most cases, it's fine. However, there is a huge variance in standards of care and how people are treated. And I always encourage people to go for second opinions. You know, we have these centers all over the country, and although there's terrific community care in most cases, and in most cases they're frankly doing a good job, but people get very scared when they get a diagnosis of cancer and they want to immediately get treatment. And sometimes going to experts who have specific expertise in that form of cancer at one of our centers is really very, very, very helpful. And there are standards and there are guidelines, and there's, of course, research that you can do, but it's complex and it is uneven. And then, of course, in minority areas and where there are really, not the resources, rural populations, it's really very troubling and very difficult to get patients to the right care. But if they can get to a center or if they can get a second opinion, it really can be really life, it can change your life.
Let me say on that note that the partnerships that are mentioned in your report, your recommendation of having public, private, as well as other partnerships, is where we at the library, in the health unit and other parts, can play a role, because that is one of the things that will help bring forums such as this out in the open, where people can come and ask questions, hear about resources. Plus, we will have on hand within our office, on our website, resources to share with people. So as we continue this and have these partnerships, I can see us really playing our role in getting the word out and getting people, particularly the ones who are in the non-scientific patient community, knowing what is going on, and we're also the ones who answer the questions of quality of life and care resources when people experience some of the side effects that they do. So already I see a lot of different reasons for you to return and have a new visitor experience. 1 second, Mr. Simon here has a question. Actually, I see many other questions. I'm pretty sure we're past 1 o'clock.
Yeah, you do.
And I would just like to, after you ask your question and get an answer, I'm going to ask one of our other planning partners, Dr. Tomoko Steen, who's also in the Science, Business, and Technology Division, and who was one of the people who partnered with us. She's an oncology pharmacist, licensed both here and in Japan, in New York and in Japan, and a lecturer also at Georgetown University. So I would like for her to come forward after this question to offer thanks to everyone who participated in this. And if you are able and willing, I'll ask people to continue to ask their questions thereafter. Go ahead, Don.
That went on so long, I forgot my question. I'm just kidding. No, I want to thank all of you, like each one of us at Field, for all the great work that you're doing in terms of treatment with immunotherapy, and the research that you're doing in terms of collecting all the data to find out who has what and how long they've had it, and prevention in terms of screening and behaviors. But one thing I didn't hear anything about, and maybe the report addresses it, and maybe the recommendations do, is what's causing cancer. And one particular area that I don't think it has to do with behavior necessarily, that you hear about, are toxins in our consumer products and carcinogens in our environment. And maybe this is more of a policy question than a science question, but is anything being looked at with respect to that? And are there any recommendations that are coming out on how to address that?
So let me say that one of our sister agencies, part of the NIH, the National Institute for Environmental Health Sciences, focuses on environmental causes of cancer. We support research in that area, as well as other aspects of causes of cancer, including obesity, infections, but when we look at the different causes, tobacco continues to be front and center. And when we think about, in the context of the cancer moonshot, tobacco really ends up being the thing that we focus on when we're talking about environmental causes. One of the other recommendations, because there is a vaccine that can prevent cancers caused by HPV infection, emphasizing uptake of the vaccine. But really, these other areas, it's one of the reasons why it's so important for us to continue to be funded for our other appropriations, because this is just one area where we need to continue to do research to uncover other important environmental causes of cancer.
Okay. You had something, Juanita? And Tomoko, in the meantime, look your way around.
Okay, just to go back over survivorship, one of the things for me, because I was on chemo for 3 years, the first protocol, CMF for 2 years, the second protocol, AC protocol, and then intensive 3 months of radiation. The aftermath of that for me was a number of things. For one thing, in 2012, because my heart, I had previously had what was called electrophysiology ablation catheterization to fix a very fast heartbeat. I had that done, and then in 2012, my heart had dropped to 18%. And then my chambers were no longer actually working together. Also, my heart muscle was shot. My electrical conduction was shot. So I had to end up being implanted with a pacemaker and defibrillator, which is what runs my heart, because my heart no longer runs on its own. So this was something that occurred. Because my immunity system was down, in 2013, I ended up getting acute renal kidney failure and was wheeled out of here into the emergency room because that dropped down to a 5 level. So all that to say, lymphedema is with me, degenerating disc disease is with me, because I had radiation was not monitored back there. Both my hands, I have carpal tunnel from the radiation that's been proven. And definitely loss of memory, which she's talking about the brain situation. I have some of those issues, along with the fact that what we haven't touched upon is the fact of PTSD in cancer patients. A lot of times, the younger you are, it seems to be, and we did something on that here at the library, because all these programs that Dr. Charles is doing, I partnered with her because of the fact I've seen the need for us to be able to have quality of life in some way, because I had to create my quality of life. I had a good diet, as I said. I had all the right things, but I ended up getting advanced stages of cancer. So all that to say, that's why we know we're going to have you all back again and again. And so I'm going to get this over to Tamiko, who partners with us as well.
Okay. One thing was not mentioned is the cost of treatment, especially immunotherapy, and it's a revolutionary treatment. So, on behalf of all the sponsoring organization at the Library of Congress, we'd like to thank excellent panelists and excellent audience. So we hope we can do it, 2017 continuously. And thank you so much for coming, everyone.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.